Greetings, traveler. Today we embark on a journey through time to discover an unrecognizable world dominated by a single supercontinent, Pangaea, surrounded by an immense ocean. Erupting volcanoes, an extreme climate, and fascinating creatures ruled over this ever-transforming planet. But before setting off on this new adventure, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. Thank you, and happy travels. Let us arrive at the edge of the Permian and study together the geology and climate of this key period in our history. The Permian, which spans approximately from 299 to 252 million years ago, was a time of major transition. During this period, terrestrial and marine life diversified and transformed in response to an often arid climate and the emergence of supercontinents like Pangaea. At that time, all the continents had coalesced into a single landmass, Pangaea. From the sky, a single C-shaped island seems to float in the middle of a blue vastness. It is not the first time the continental masses have unified, but it is the first time that a single mass is so flourishing with life. Unfortunately, the living beings of this period will have to get creative to survive, and for several reasons. Firstly, this unique configuration leads to intense tectonic activity. Mountain ranges form, basins sink, and the movements of the plates reveal a continually transforming Earth. The climate is also defined by its extreme character. The interior of Pangaea experiences significant temperature variations, with arid summers and harsh winters. The vast continental expanse promotes the emergence of desert zones with rugged terrains, while the edges of the supercontinent, influenced by the ocean, offer slightly more moderated conditions. This striking contrast between dryness and humidity then creates a mosaic of varied habitats, laying the foundations of the first complex ecological networks that would influence the evolution of life. The beings composing this order of life develop incredible characteristics, ingenious adaptation systems, and physical traits as surprising as they are effective. And what about the plants that manage to grow despite such a hot and dry climate? It's time to meet our protagonists, true pillars of the world we know today. The Permian is a veritable incubator. On land and sea, our planet teems with life. We encounter species as different and incredible as each other. Despite this richness of biodiversity and the apparent calm, none of them know how limited their time is. By the end of the period, an unprecedented mass extinction will strike Earth. We could focus on the aftermath of this crisis and the emerging species, but it's important to understand who lived on Earth before the apocalypse, who succumbed, who survived, and how. Only the answers to these questions will allow us to understand the emergence of the Triassic and the rise of the first reptiles. If everything is about to change in a few minutes on our temporal journey scale, life seems quite peaceful for now. Well, peaceful is relative. The predator-prey cycle is perfectly established, and the least we can say is that some regions of the world were hostile to any creatures that were somewhat fragile. Let's see how things are evolving first in the open air, on terrestrial ground. Then we'll meet in the ocean to see if marine animals are more peaceful than on land. But nothing is less certain. In synapsids, they managed to break free from the aquatic world. And even better, they were able to brave extreme temperatures. How? For some, it's simply thanks to a very particular dorsal sail. Yes, you guessed it, it is notably found in one of the most well-known reptiles of the time, the Dimetrodon, often mistakenly confused with a dinosaur. In the same category, we can also mention Adaptasaurus. But before we meet them, let's see how the forerunners of life on land, the amphibians, lead their lives on the shores bordering this pond. Amphibians were already present earlier and still held a notable place in the Permian. We mentioned a few of them earlier, The one with the boomerang-shaped head, the Diplocaulus, measures about 1 meter or 3 feet long. Its name means double crest. For the moment, scientists have not managed to unlock the mystery of this famous crest. Did its skull help it catch the current or guide it to the bottom? Did it have a defensive function, or was it a kind of camouflage to hide like some marine species do today? We don't have the answers, especially since young individuals of this species don't seem to have a boomerang-shaped head. Archaeops, on the other hand, as we have seen, is equipped for hunting and is quite a good predator. Its name means protected eye. It is a much more massive amphibian than our Diplocaulus. The combined study of these two amphibians shows how diverse the group could be. In Archaeops, the skeleton is stout and its triangular skull just as imposing. It lived near wetlands, but more easily on the surface than its counterpart. It had a palate with curved fangs, very useful for hunting fish, prey that tend to be slippery due to their viscosity. A little anecdote about this amphibian and its way of swallowing. Not a very appetizing anecdote, to be honest. Like frogs, Archaeops uses a rather original organ for this: its eyeballs. Incredible, isn't it? And rather disgusting when you think about it. To swallow its prey, like that poor lungfish for example, it closes its eyes, which makes its eyeballs partially pass through the palate, thus pressing on the food that will be directed towards the digestive tract. If these two amphibians are quite radically different, they still have several things in common. The first is their dependence on humid environments. This close link with water makes them particularly vulnerable to the drier climatic conditions that gradually settle in during the Permian. The second is their predator. It seems they both face the same challenge against the Dimetrodon. This brings us to discuss the next terrestrial group of the Permian, the reptiles, and more particularly, the synapsids. These amniotes, formerly called mammal-like reptiles, are the direct ancestors of mammals. They exhibit particular adaptations and a great diversification of forms. One of the major revolutions in this group is, of course, the ability to regulate their temperature. At a time when the climate can be extremely hot and not a single drop of rain falls for months, it's a significant advantage over other species, particularly the amphibians. The latter cannot break free from the aquatic environment for reproduction, for instance. Their eggs must absolutely be laid in water to allow the species to survive. When drought prevails on Earth, it's the survival of the entire species that's at risk. That's why some amphibians had to create something like estivating burrows. They dug galleries in the mud, leaving only their nostrils at the surface to capture outside air. Unfortunately for some of them, it was also a fragile organ that predators such as Dimetrodon could easily grab. What seems to have happened in a burrow located in what is now Texas, in a Permian delta where there were young Diplocaulus, but also an Archaeops. Dimetrodon is one of the very first land vertebrates to have developed serrated teeth, very effective for catching prey in burrows and not letting them go. They also allow for cutting food and handling robust prey. Physically, Dimetrodon looks like a sort of huge iguana. It has a big head, a large lizard tail, a stout body, and a large sail on its back. According to some scientific estimates, it can be imagined that an adult specimen of 200 kilos or 441 lbs can regulate its temperature from 26 degrees to 32 degrees or 79 degrees Celsius to 90 degrees Celsius in about an hour and a half. It is often mistaken for a dinosaur. It has, however, a characteristic that shows it cannot be part of this group. Besides the fact that they appeared much later, it has lateral legs rather than vertical ones, unlike all dinosaurs. This synapsid, averaging 4.5 meters or 15 feet in length, is capable of attacking very large prey. Given its physique, but also its hunting capabilities, it is at the top of the food chain. We could describe it as an alpha predator. However, it is not the only one with interesting capabilities for the time. Lystrosaurus also has noteworthy features. It is known for its robustness and ability to survive in harsh environments, which made it a survivor of massive extinction. Lystrosaurus is a dicynodont belonging to the therapsids, a subgroup of synapsids. It has a truly singular appearance with its pair of tusks on the upper jaw. This characteristic is where the name dicynodont, two dog teeth, comes from. Despite these two tusks, like the elephant, our Lystrosaurus is a thorough herbivore. The synapsid feeds on small plants, but also roots, and can even manage to catch some aquatic plants. A brief reminder to better understand all these new species. Synapsids are amniotes, whose skull lacks one or more temporal openings near the temples. Synapsids and sauropsids are also amniotes, and split at the very end of the Carboniferous. Sauropsids are a clade of tetrapods that include reptiles and birds. They are a sister group to synapsids. Synapsids, in turn, include all mammals and therapsids, that is, mammal-like reptiles, from which the latter likely evolved. During the Permian, these therapsids appear, offering the prospect of evolution into future mammals. It is even possible, according to an article published in 2010 in the International Journal of Animal Biosciences on the evolution of milk secretion and its ancient origins, that one of the characteristics of mammals can be found in the early synapsids, and thus, by extension, the first therapsids. The article highlights the fact that milk started as glandular secretion in synapsids from the Carboniferous. Initially, if they laid eggs, the shells were as fragile as parchment and would not withstand the slightest drying out. The glands, therefore, were used to hydrate the shells. Later, they evolved to provide the nutritional role we know today. In summary, amniotes are gradually represented by three distinct branches: the anapsids, which will later in our history include turtles, the synapsids, which will encompass mammals, and the sauropsids, which reptiles, snakes, crocodiles, birds, and thus, by definition, dinosaurs, will be part of. Lystrosaurus, however, is still far from resembling our mammals, even though it is a therapsid. How will it survive the impending crisis? The answer is simple: hibernation. Unlike other counterparts, especially from South Africa, it is able to withstand seasonal variations and subsist until the temperatures become more favorable and conducive to its search for food. Another group of therapsids, this time carnivorous, demonstrates diversification as early as the Permian. Here are the Gorgonopsians. Among them, you can find species the size of a wolf or even a bear. They have a very robust and thick skeleton and saber-shaped canines. They are also found in South Africa, but also in Russia. The one found here is a part of them. It's a Lycanops. It can feast on a wide variety of prey, dicynodonts, but also pariasaurs, depending on what it encounters. This allows us to make a small transition and observe some primitive reptiles. As early as the Permian, we observed the emergence of reptiles adapting to more arid terrestrial environments and varying in size and morphology. Pariasaurus is a large herbivore with a robust body, playing an important role in terrestrial ecosystems. It is part of the anapsids. Its lifestyle could be compared to that of hippos, for example. It's an animal with a very stocky body and limbs. It is also equipped with a sort of dermal armor that protects it from attacks. Despite its 2.5 meters or 8 feet in length, it can be attacked, notably by Lycanops, ready to hunt in groups. Its armor could help deter the boldness of certain predators. It is covered with small, bony pieces, similar to warts that surface on the skin and complicate the predator's hunting. These are called osteoderms. It is perfectly equipped to deal with all sorts of plant fibers. It has leaf-shaped teeth that are very robust and ideal for cutting through the thick fiber of some plants, cutting and grinding. It even has teeth on the roof of the mouth. Now that we have closely encountered the main protagonists of the Permian on land, let's see those who lived in the heart of the ocean. Let's start our marine experience with the invertebrates. The oceans of the Permian harbored a rich biodiversity of invertebrates, essential for the dating of geological strata. At the time, these invertebrates were situated at the bottom of the marine food chain. There were all sorts of groups, families, and species, from mollusks to brachiopods to foraminifera. If there is a place where these invertebrates explode, it is in the Tethys. This ocean, nestled in the crook of the C-shaped supercontinent Pangaea, bathes in sediments carried by erosion. They tumble down the mountain slopes to reach the water, slowly settle to the bottom, and feed the first links of the chain. But all this fauna would be inconceivable without rich and diverse coral reefs, allowing all this marine life to find food and shelter. The reefs of the Permian are absolutely incredible. Here we are facing one of them, located in Texas. Here, we can see gigantic sponges, like Gigantospongia. They can be as long as 2 meters or 7 feet. If on their own, they constitute a choice ecological niche. They coexist with many other marine architects. There is also a whole variety of colonial corals and solitary corals. And in the midst of all this, an effervescence of aquatic life. Fish, such as Platysimus or Dorypterus, both ray-finned fish. They are said to be primitive, but the group is promised a bright future. Dorypterus is about 14 centimeters or 6 inches long. You can see in this one that the vertebral column extends into the upper part of the tail. Cartilaginous fish and lobe-finned fish, like the Sarcopterygians, coelacanths, or even the dipnoans, are also continuing their diversification and quest for specialization. In the seabed, a few trilobites are found, but this group is declining more and more noticeably. It must be said that the competition is fierce with the presence of brachiopods and mollusks. The brachiopods, like Leptidus or even Spirifer, are still very present in the reefs, such as those we have just observed. The star attraction of the period is the nautiloid Cooperoceras. The cephalopod mollusks are expanding rapidly and flaunt increasingly diverse shells. Here, they have spines to protect themselves from predators. One must be wary, however, of the first reptiles venturing into the conquest of the oceans, notably Mesosaurus, one of the oldest. It's a real crustacean devourer. Researchers believe it used the undulation technique to move, as suggested by its skull and long, narrow tail. Its jaw, equipped with small, elongated, thin, and very sharp teeth, was perfectly designed to devour small carapaces. For the record, Mesosaurus has been very useful to humans long after its disappearance. It has indeed helped to strengthen the hypothesis of the unification of landmasses into a single continent. According to the study of its skeleton, even if its thick banana-shaped ribs allowed it to dive, it was impossible for it to have crossed the ocean from one end to the other. Even though it was deeply attached to the aquatic environment, it was not completely free and unbound from the terrestrial ground. It could be that, like turtles still do today, the animal laid its eggs on the beach. There is also a high likelihood that it hibernated on these same beaches. Studies are still ongoing, and we will likely learn more soon about this iconic animal of the Permian. Before closing this chapter, it is important to understand that the Permian period was an era of transition where fauna evolved to adapt to an increasingly arid climate and the unique configuration of the supercontinent Pangaea. Besides the groups mentioned above, Other lines of animals, including some terrestrial arthropods, complemented the biological mosaic of the time. This rich biodiversity, whether animal or plant, terrestrial or marine, lays the foundation for the future. The climate is changing, and mass extinction becomes inevitable. However, some species manage to prepare, so to speak, by adopting new characteristics. For others, unfortunately, it marks an end, sharp, clear, and definitive. The Permian-Triassic biological crisis, which occurred approximately 252 million years ago, represents the most devastating mass extinction in Earth's history. This event marks the end of the Permian and the beginning of the Triassic, radically redefining the composition of both terrestrial and marine ecosystems. If it was so significant, it is undoubtedly due to the numerous causes that triggered it. The period was characterized by massive and intense volcanic activity. The eruption of the Siberian Traps is now considered the main driver of this crisis. Immense volumes of lava were emitted, releasing astronomical amounts of greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide and methane. These gases caused a rapid global warming and intensified the greenhouse effect phenomenon. This warming disrupted climatic cycles, that's obvious, but it also altered the chemistry of the oceans. The warming of the oceans led to a decrease in their oxygen content, creating anoxic zones, meaning they were low in oxygen. Without this precious gas, life becomes outright impossible. Imagine being deprived of this source of life. This led to the collapse of marine food chains, of course, but the lack of oxygen is not the only cause of the tragedies experienced by marine creatures. Alongside this oceanic anoxia, the acidification of waters, caused by the massive absorption of CO2, made survival difficult for many sensitive marine species. They did not have time to adapt to this new environmental characteristic. Without adaptation, no survival of the species. Although volcanism remains the dominant cause, some studies also suggest that additional factors, such as possible meteorite impacts or disruptions in biogeochemical cycles, might have contributed to the extent of the disaster. However, these hypotheses are still the subject of ongoing scientific debates. The future may perhaps provide us with more answers. What is certain is that the changes are intense and the responses of some species far too weak given the ongoing mutations. No wonder a large number of animals and plants ended up disappearing. At the end of this vibrant and tumultuous Permian era, Earth thus becomes the scene of an unprecedented cataclysm, the Permian-Triassic extinction. The Permian-Triassic crisis led to the extinction of about 75% of terrestrial species and up to 96% of marine species. The disappearance of many groups, such as certain trilobites, numerous corals, some brachiopods, and a large portion of invertebrates in general, radically simplified the biodiversity existing at the time. This catastrophe allowed the emergence of new lineages and set the stage for the evolutionary radiation that would characterize the Triassic. The survivors, often more generalist species, or those with particular survival strategies, were able to exploit these opportunities to diversify their lifestyles. Of course, the recovery of biodiversity after this crisis was a long and gradual process, spanning several million years. Because yes, without this catastrophe, our planet would likely not have experienced such a rapid rise in dinosaurs, the emblematic animals of the Mesozoic. The Triassic is a long era that spans from 252 to 201 million years ago, MYA. It marks the first chapter of the Mesozoic, a key period in our history marked by the presence of dinosaurs for millions of years. But before these colossi walked the Earth, our world had to fulfill a number of characteristics to prepare for their arrival. And this preparation is closely linked to the emergence of reptiles. The Triassic, quickly becomes a springboard for this group in search of diversification and new territories. But before getting there, life had to rise from its ashes. We are still faced with a single supercontinent, Pangaea, although the beginnings of some changes are already announced. A rift begins to form between what will become Africa and North America, leading to the opening of the Atlantic Ocean. On these emergent lands, there are vast arid expanses, but also wetter coastal areas. Indeed, the large size of Pangaea inevitably causes seasonality. Summers are very hot and winters very cold. That's for the continental climate. There are also very dry and arid areas. They extend over large lands. However, there are also areas that could be qualified as intertropical with monsoons. These areas are located near the Tethys Ocean that we already mentioned in the Permian. The climate obviously influences the flora and fauna that slowly recover from the crisis. Among surviving plants, we find several groups, including Cicadelales, Lycopodiales, and Ginkgophytes. But all these groups will gradually be replaced by a new type of plants, better adapted to the terrestrial climatic conditions, conifers. With the climate being very zoned, these conifers are mainly found in the northern hemisphere. Elsewhere, ferns and other seed plants still have bright futures. We will have the opportunity to revisit the plant cover of the era a bit later on our journey. For now, animals await us, and not just any animals. The fauna of the Triassic is radically different from that of the Permian. We find a few surviving species, but many did not survive, and all the others had to renew or even reinvent themselves to hope to go further. After several million years, biodiversity returns to a comparable level, even if the elements that compose it are very distant. Evolutionary radiations allowed species to specialize and colonize various environments that were not yet exploited. Dimetrodon, for example, which reigned supreme over the amphibians and fish of the Permian, has disappeared. Among amphibians and other tetrapods, some lineages of amphibians specialize, while others decline in the face of the diversification of amniotes. Amphibians that manage to get through the biological crisis will still modernize and specialize. They will pave the way, for example, to modern amphibians we call lissamphibians. A small handful of the amphibian group, particularly the temnospondylls, still inhabit the wet areas of the Triassic that we observed before the crisis. This is true of the monstrous labyrinthodonts, those large amphibians with the appearance of giant salamanders. Labyrinthodonts means labyrinth teeth. When you look at a cross-section of one of their teeth, you immediately understand the choice of this particular name. The enamel looks as tortuous as the labyrinth of the Athenian Daedalus. In the Triassic, among temnospondylls, specimens are often impressive. Metaposaurus is remarkable for the reliefs found on its cranial plates. During the same period, another genus of temnospondyl can be seen, one that nearly reaches 7 meters or 23 feet long. This is a brachiopoid. The brachiopoid from Alwainscope, found in what is today Lesotho in Africa, is one of the most impressive of the time. We will find them again in the Jurassic and even the Cretaceous with Siderops and Coulosuchus. Since the Permian and Prionosuchus, we had not seen a temnospondyl amphibian so large. Despite their imposing size, these large amphibians were not the major predators of this period. They gradually give way to diapsid reptiles. This clade may not ring a bell, but you know one of its members, the archosaur. This is where it all begins. It is the main character of our story and the undisputed protagonist of the Triassic. The archosaur will experience an unprecedented adaptive radiation and give rise to important groups of animals, such as crocodiles, dinosaurs, and even pterosaurs. Between the appearance and diversification of archosaurs, everything happened very quickly. It is a group that adapted to many environments and geographical areas, but also faced climatic or geochemical challenges. All the vacant niches that the biological crisis left behind will favor the rise and diversification of this particular group. These animals mark a fracture between the Permian and the Triassic. The face of the fauna is forever changed. We sometimes forget, but archosaurs also gave birth to several groups that only lived during the Triassic. There are the edosaurs, phytosaurs, and the Rauisuchians. The Rauisuchians look a bit like crocodiles, except that their legs are aligned vertically under their belly and not on the sides. They lived in Brazil during the Middle Triassic. Measuring 4 meters or 13 feet long, they could weigh up to 250 kilos or 551 lbs. Saurosuchus is probably the longest of the Rauisuchians of the period, as it approaches 7 meters or 23 feet. It has curved, serrated, and rather long teeth, which also suggests it was a fairly powerful predator. It shares a common feature with modern crocodiles, the joint between the top of the skull and the maxilla. Phytosaurs also seem very close to crocodiles. Whether through their physical aspects or their lifestyle, similarities are indeed found. The jaw is rather long and narrow. It is equipped with numerous sharp teeth that allow it to tease fish without much difficulty. The nostrils are positioned on the top of the skull. This particular morphology strongly suggests the ability to float on the surface, only allowing the nostrils to emerge to better surprise and attack its prey. They move on dry land, but can be considered semi-aquatic reptiles. Like crocodiles, a sort of bony plate runs along their back. Belodon or Rudiodon are two genera of phytosaurs. Measuring 3 meters or 10 feet long, their head is impressive and alone accounts for a third of the total body length. The Triassic also sees the appearance of the first pterosaurs. They are often confused with dinosaurs, but they are flying reptiles and not dinosaurs. Among the oldest pterosaurs, we can mention Australodactylus. It doesn't have a particularly lucky-looking head, but a human would have had nothing to fear from it during the Triassic period. It feeds mainly on fish and insects. We can even talk about flying archosaurs. This pterosaur is about 90 centimeters or 35 inches long. When it spreads its wings, its wingspan exceeds 1 meter 20 or 47 inches, yet it weighs barely 15 kilocalories or 33 lbs and resembles a bat. A very large bat. Other pterosaurs, like Eudimorphodon or Priondactylus, share the same environment but have a silhouette somewhat closer to birds. Priondactylus has a long tail that ends with a leaf or feather shape. It also has a rather piscivorous and insectivorous diet, but archosaurians can display widely different silhouettes and morphologies. Just look at Edosaurus, a small primitive edosaur equipped with a long and narrow shell covered with spikes and scales, and Plateosaurus, which can measure 8 meters or 26 feet long, weigh up to 4 tons or 8,818 lbs, and move on 2 or 4 legs to feed on mid-level foliage. Plateosaurus is also a sauropodomorph, a branch that will gradually lead to dinosaurs. It's time to discover the two groups that will leave an indelible mark on Earth, one of dinosaurs, which will lead to birds, and the other of cynodonts, which will evolve into mammals. Let's start with Eoraptor. Its name is almost poetic and means dawn thief. It is a small sauropodomorph dinosaur and one of the oldest the Earth has known. This dinosaur is far from displaying the extreme measurements that other dinosaurs will later achieve. It hardly reaches a meter or 3 feet long, stands 40 centimeters or 16 inches high, and weighs no more than 10 kilos or 22 lbs. Another striking fact about this species is that it is digitigrade. This means that its walking or running rests on its fingers. These weren't just for support in movement either. They were effective as hunting weapons in their own right. Each of its hands had 5 fingers, 3 of them extended into large claws. During a hunt, Eoraptor would use them to pin its prey to the ground. However, we shouldn't think that our little dinosaur was a skillful hunter and an exclusive carnivore. It was quite flexible in terms of diet. It fed, depending on its whims, on small animals as well as tender leaves. Another small Triassic dinosaur is Herrerasaurus. Since the appearance of the first dinosaurs, 2 major clades have emerged, the Saurischians and the Ornithischians. Herrerasaurus is part of the former, the Saurischians. They have a reptile-like pelvis, and paradoxically, they are the ones that will lead to birds. Unlike Eoraptor, Herrerasaurus is an excellent hunter, and its carnivorous diet is undeniable given the diversity of prey it attacks. To put it simply, it feeds on all the vertebrates in its ecosystem. Whether they are herbivorous diapsids like Rhynchosaurus, Dicynodonts, herbivorous therapsids, or even omnivores like atosaurs, everything goes. Like Eoraptor, it also has claws on 3 fingers of its hand. It also has a claw on one of the toes of the hind legs, like a sort of spur. It must be noted that it has a few advantages that allow it to achieve this small feat. Its jaw. It has an extremely flexible joint and curved teeth. It can easily grasp prey and, most importantly, not let go. While its diet leaves no doubt, its classification is far from simple. It is one of those animals with traits, meaning anatomical, physiological, behavioral, or even molecular characteristics, belonging to different groups. Herrerasaurus meets the conditions to be a dinosaur, but also displays many characteristics of non-dinosaurian archosaurians. Let's say it is a dinosauromorph. Its pelvis is indeed that of a Saurischian dinosaur, with the pubis pointing backward. Finally, at the time, you could also encounter on the continent, particularly in what is now Mexico, Coelophysis. It was a small bipedal carnivore, measuring about 3 meters or 10 feet long and 1 meter or 3 feet high. Its tail alone accounted for half of its size. However, it remained a relatively light animal, weighing between 15 and 20 kilo or 33 and 44 lbs. This little dinosaur adapted and specialized perfectly. It targeted fast prey. For this purpose, it had a slender, narrow jaw, a flexible and light silhouette, and long legs. It also had a specific dentition. The teeth, curved backwards, and the lower jaw that fit perfectly with the upper jaw allowed the animal to seize its prey with greater ease, even if it was fast and agile. Besides the dinosaurs, there was another group making a somewhat timid appearance during the Triassic, but one that would become crucial for the subsequent history of the order of life, the mammals. It all starts with the therapsids. We have seen that the therapsids were doing rather well so far. Some, like Dicynodontia, even managed to maintain and even develop themselves. From their group emerged the cynodonts, ancestors of the first mammals. Small in size, they had fur, and their teeth were similar to those of today's dogs. They were still timid, yet quite brave when you consider the environment they managed to integrate. From the beginning, they had to face animals much larger, more robust, aggressive, and hostile than themselves, and live in an emerging post-crisis world. Cynodonts form a clade of therapsids that appeared at the end of the Permian and included mammaliforms and closely related basal groups. But it is only during the Mesozoic that this clade would truly diversify. One of them is Morganucodon. Predator-prey relationships with archosaurs and cynodonts promote significant evolutionary dynamics. Confronted with each other, they are pushed to always push the limits of their abilities further. For cynodonts, adaptation consists of moving towards an insectivorous diet and a nocturnal lifestyle. Like many members of the mammaliform clade at that time, Morganucodon was a small nocturnal animal. It must be said that it was by far the least competitive and challenged ecological niche during this period, they would have been wrong not to take advantage of it. Our tiny mammaliform already presented a double jaw. However, it features characteristics of both future mammals and reptiles and theropsids. Indeed, we find the mandible and the squamosal bone, which suggest a mammal, but also the articular and quadrate bones of reptiles. Specialization for an insectivorous diet and nocturnal lifestyle will encourage the group to adopt new characteristics. The teeth, first of all, would differentiate to be able to capture, but also crush, arthropods, for example. Then, senses like hearing and smell would develop considerably. We observe the development of the inner ear and the increase of cerebral lobes to better analyze information. We even begin to see the first adaptations in the field of thermal insulation with the appearance of fur. As you can understand, the world is changing on Earth during the Triassic. The break between the Permian and this first chapter of the Mesozoic is truly striking. We see the majority of Permian groups die out, while the surviving species take advantage of this new turn to benefit from it. They specialize, develop, and manage to conquer ever-expanding territories. If this is the case on the continent, it is also the case in the ocean. The number of marine reptiles has skyrocketed enormously in just a few million years. It's time to dive into the Tethys and realize how much things have changed here too. Here we are, a few meters or a few yards underwater near the reefs. It's always in these architectural marvels that life flourishes the most. It's somewhat the cradle of marine life. After the crisis, the ocean initially struggled a lot to regenerate. Everything was so devastated. It was utter chaos. After several million years, reefs started forming again. However, it's no longer the tetracoralline corals, but primarily the hexacoralline ones that we find. Other animals, like crinoids, also contribute to the construction and enrichment of these reefs. During the Triassic, there is Encrinus, for example, which somewhat resembles a marine flower. Numerous algae also enrich the seabed. Thus, the reefs regain all their prestige and can finally host life. Several fish, particularly the actinopterygians, which are the ray-finned fish, contribute to the diversification and complexity of the Triassic marine ecosystems. One example is the Bobacitrania, measuring about 20 centimeters or 8 inches. It has a diamond-shaped body, a slightly forked tail, and long pectoral fins. Despite its rather modest size, it's a carnivore. Given its teeth, it probably feeds on animals with shells. Another actinopterygian from the same period is Perlitus. It's a bit smaller, about 15 centimeters or 6 inches long, with very flexible dorsal and anal fins. According to studies conducted by the scientific community, it would be a rather agile swimmer in the water. Yet, its living environment is fraught with challenges. One only needs to observe what floats around these fish. Reptiles haven't just invaded the continent, they have also extensively conquered the ocean. Marine reptiles are booming: placodonts, plesiosaurs, nothosaurs, ichthyosaurs. The shallow waters of the Tethys Ocean teem with these marine animals, each more formidable than the last. They would occupy these new niches of the Triassic seas as masters and become true terrors of the seas. Placotus is a placodont. It belongs to the marine diapsids. Diapsids are to sauropsids what theropsids are to synapsids, meaning a continuity, an evolution of these clades of amniote tetrapods. The diapsids, being sauropsids, have 2 pairs of temporal fenestrae. Placotus was perfectly designed to attack shells and crustaceans. It was notably armed with long teeth curved forward. Among marine reptiles, it can be distinguished by the bony plates that cover its body. In this universe of marine reptiles, we can mention Pachypleurosaurus, Thalattosaurus alexandri, with its very long paddle-like tail, or even Myodontosaurus, which shares the same swimming characteristics in terms of tail. In another kind, there is also Nothosaurus. It has a very characteristic long neck and webbed feet. Its name means false lizard. Like Plecotus, it is considered semi-aquatic. To better understand its lifestyle, one might compare it with that of our present-day seals. It spends most of its time in the water to hunt. Generally, it eagerly gets fish between its teeth. Other reptiles, like Myxosaurus, belong to the ichthyosaurs. This group of reptiles is perhaps the best adapted to the marine environment. It has a dorsal fin, is exclusively aquatic, and manages perfectly in the water. It has a hydrodynamic silhouette and eyes adapted to underwater vision. Despite looking like dolphins, they are not at all related. It measures less than 1 meter or 3 feet and rarely exceeds 20 kilos or 44 lbs. Some scientists, notably Georg Bauer, a Bavarian zoologist, believe that the animal's tail is one of the characteristics that will subdivide the ichthyosaurs into 2 distinct groups in subsequent periods: those that will adopt an eel-like shape like Symbospondylus, and the ichthyosaurs that will prefer the dolphin shape. Their diversity is as incredible as their evolution, especially when we know that these animals evolved from a line of terrestrial lepidosauromorph diapsids that eventually adapted to aquatic life. We will notice the same evolutionary process in another group today exclusively marine, the cetaceans. These animals indeed took their first steps on land. We are back on the continent. Lush forests, green plains, oases in the middle of the desert. Vegetation is rich and diverse in the Triassic period. Depending on the climate and regions, it changes, adapts, and evolves. At the beginning of the Triassic, some surviving plants from the Permian, notably lycophytes, still temporarily dominated certain arid environments. Gradually, these vestiges of the past, if we may call them so, gave way to a flora in full mutation. Thus, cycads belonging to the order Cicadellas spread increasingly across the lands of Pangaea. They developed so extensively during the Mesozoic that the period is sometimes referred to as the Age of Cycads. These cycads adapt to harsh conditions and embody the robustness of gymnosperms. In an environment marked by drought and high evaporation, they manage to stand out. Not only do they survive, but they also grow, develop, and extend their territory. While these plants have characteristics of ferns, they also adopt some physical traits of palms. The age of cycads is limited, however, to the southern hemisphere. In the northern hemisphere, the revolution of plants would rather be that of seed plants, the ginkgophytes, of which the only living representative today is Ginkgo biloba. This genus also demonstrates its great capacity for resistance to the changing conditions of the time. Remember, we talked about particularly cold winters, very hot summers, and highly variable climates. Still in the northern hemisphere, primitive conifers multiply and gradually form vast forests adapted to the continental climate. While the cycads have conquered the southern hemisphere, it is the conifers that make up the main vegetation cover of the northern hemisphere. The main challenge for plants was to be able to reproduce despite the lack of water and the dry and arid climate they could sometimes encounter. The genus Walchia offers some insights into their adaptation. These conifers are indeed capable of producing hardy seeds and conserving water in an environment where vast deserts dominated the central lands of Pangaea. While gymnosperms thus play a predominant role in the Triassic ecosystem, tree ferns help diversify and enrich this ecosystem. These ferns, which can reach impressive sizes, provided both shade and food resources to a fauna in full diversification. The pteridosperms, seed ferns, embody, if you will, the transition between reproduction by spores and that by seeds, thus marking a crucial intermediate stage in the evolution of vegetation. Gradually, this vegetation will pave the way for seeds, but also for flowers and then fruits, the angiosperms, thus promoting the development of new ecological niches and, by extension, the diversification and enrichment of the surrounding fauna. The disparity between Laurasia and Gondwana also favored regional diversity and prepared the ground for the emergence of these famous angiosperms that would radically transform terrestrial ecosystems. At the end of the Triassic, the biosphere experiences another major crisis, often called the Triassic-Jurassic mass extinction. Several families of non-dinosaur reptiles, such as the phytosaurs or some large temnospondyl amphibians, disappear or decline significantly. Similarly, entire lineages of conodonts, these marine microorganisms serving as biostratigraphic markers, go extinct after having dominated oceanic ecosystems since the Paleozoic. It is estimated that up to 20% of marine families and a good proportion of terrestrial species permanently vanish from the Earth's surface. The causes of this crisis remain debated, but increased volcanic activity linked to the opening of the Central Atlantic is often emphasized. The most common hypothesis suggests that enormous lava flows in what is called the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province released considerable volumes of CO2, causing global warming and oceanic changes. The Earth, then dominated by a single continent, Pangaea, begins to fragment. Rifts form, slowly separating the northern hemisphere, with Laurasia, from the southern hemisphere, with Gondwana. This continental breakup will influence ocean circulation and climate distribution, preparing the entry into the Jurassic. At the beginning of the Jurassic, 200 million years ago, the Triassic-Jurassic crisis left many ecological niches vacant, allowing dinosaurs, which had already appeared at the end of the Triassic, to widely establish themselves on the continents. Among them, the theropods dominated the world of carnivores. These bipedal dinosaurs, often agile and efficient predators, include notable genera like Dilophosaurus, a carnivore about 6 to 7 meters, 20 to 23 feet long, recognizable by its double-crested skull, or Cryolophosaurus, which measured about 6.5 meters, 21 feet. The sauropodomorphs, descendants of the first herbivorous dinosaurs of the Triassic, like Plateosaurus, evolved into more massive forms. The last prosauropods gave way to true sauropods, quadrupeds with long necks and imposing silhouettes, heralding future giants like Brachiosaurus or Diplodocus. Even if their representatives of the early Jurassic remain of more modest size, some already exceed 10 meters, 33 feet in length. The climate of the early Jurassic is marked by the gradual breakup of Pangaea, leading to a differentiation of landscapes. Vast, humid coastal regions developed, while the interior of the continents remained arid or subjected to seasonal precipitation regimes. New mountain ranges altered the circulation of winds and rains, promoting distinct floras. Conifers, particularly close relatives of the Araucaria, dominated in seasonal climates, while tree ferns, cycads, and ginkgophytes thrived in more humid regions, forming a varied plant cover that fed the expanding herbivores. In the oceans, the reorganization of water masses led to the formation of interior marine basins where life exploded in diversity. Ammonites, cephalopod mollusks with spiral shells, proliferated into a multitude of species with varied forms and sizes. Belemnites, cousins of cuttlefish, also multiplied. Among fish, ray-finned actinopterygians continued their rise, diversifying forms and predation strategies. Marine reptiles also increased in diversity. The first plesiosaurs, with their graceful long necks, appeared alongside plesiosaurs, including Macroplata, a formidable hunter with powerful jaws. Ichthyosaurs continued their specialization for hunting in the open sea, with species like Ophthalmosaurus, whose immense eyes allowed it to spot prey in the depths. In the Middle Jurassic, the drift of the continents intensified. Laurasia, consisting of North America, Europe, and Asia in the north, became increasingly separated from Gondwana, which included South America, Africa, Antarctica, Australia, and India in the south. Epicontinental seas, shallow seas, proliferated, creating natural bridges or barriers for fauna and flora. This geographical dynamic stimulated speciation. Animal and plant populations became isolated, giving rise to distinct evolutionary lineages. It was the golden age of giant sauropods. from diplodocids, like Cetiosaurus, to brachiosaurids, such as Brachiosaurus, these herbivorous colossi sometimes exceeded 20 meters, 66 feet in length, and weighed several tens of tons. Their long legs allowed them to travel great distances in search of foliage. Discoveries of fossil track sites indicate that some moved in herds, suggesting relatively complex social behavior. To feed, these sauropods exploited different strata of the canopy. Some, with shorter necks, grazed near the ground, while others, with immense necks, reached the highest treetops. The coniferous and tree fern forests thrived in the relative humidity of river basins and expanded impressively. In these forests, small herbivorous dinosaurs, primitive ornithopods like Camptosaurus, remained more discreet under the canopy. The population boom of large herbivores also favored the emergence of formidable predators. On the carnivore side, theropods diversified. Megalosaurids, for example, included massive hunters such as Megalosaurus. Allosaurids gradually emerged. Allosaurus would begin to dominate at the end of the Middle Jurassic and especially in the Late Jurassic. These several-ton superpredators hunted alone or in small groups, likely targeting more vulnerable sauropods. In the skies, pterosaurs gained in variety. Rhamphorhynchids, like Rhamphorhynchus, still retained long tails with diamond-shaped tips, while pterodactyloids began to develop a more modern morphology, characterized by shortened tails and sometimes crested skulls. On the vegetation front, the end of the Middle Jurassic saw the expansion of Podocarpus-type conifers and Araucariaceae, as well as the persistence of ginkgophytes. The moist soils were often covered with a dense layer of horsetails and ferns. The Late Jurassic remains a highlight of the dinosaur era. Famous geological formations, like the Morrison Formation in North America or the Tendaguru Formation in Tanzania, have yielded numerous emblematic fossils. Sauropods still dominated the landscapes. Apatosaurus, Diplodocus, Brontosaurus, Brachiosaurus, and even Giraffatitan reached colossal dimensions. Meanwhile, stegosaurs, with Stegosaurus as a major representative, boasted dorsal plates with thermoregulatory or display functions. Some defended themselves with formidable tail spikes. Theropods continued their ascent. Allosaurus, a large carnivore that could measure up to 9 meters, 30 feet long, reigned supreme over the Morrison Formation, alongside other predators like Ceratosaurus or Torvosaurus. In Europe, limestone terrains, particularly in southern Germany, the Solnhofen area, reveal remarkably preserved fossils of marine animals, insects, and especially a crucial evolutionary link, Archaeopteryx. This feathered animal, long considered the first bird, illustrates the transition between feathered dinosaurs and true flight. It possesses reptilian features, teeth, claws on the wings, long bony tail, but also asymmetrical flight feathers, evidence of an adaptation to aerial movement, even though its flight must have been rather clumsy. The Late Jurassic also saw the diversification of primitive mammals. Cynodonts evolved into varied mammalia forms, such as Morganucodon, which appeared in the Triassic, or Docodon. Their nocturnal insectivorous or omnivorous lifestyle remained confined to niches little exploited by diurnal dinosaurs. On the plant front, conifer forests persisted, and ferns, cycads, and bennettitals, plants with complex cones, were abundant. Brachiopods, ammonites, and belemnites thrived in warm seas, accompanied by plesiosaurs and sometimes gigantic pliosaurs, such as Pliosaurus. The Jurassic-Cretaceous transition around 145 million years ago does not correspond to a massive extinction crisis like that of the end of the Triassic, but rather to a gradual transition. The continents continue to drift apart. The the central Atlantic is widening, the Tethys Ocean separates Europe from Africa, and India begins its northward drift. The continental masses drifting apart create insular environments, favoring new evolutionary radiations. Dinosaurs continue their diversification. Sauropods are still present. Europasaurus, for example, demonstrates the phenomenon of insular dwarfism, since it does not exceed 6 meters or 20 feet in certain regions that form islands of the early Cretaceous. Iguanodontids, like Iguanodon or Mantellisaurus, are large herbivores, capable of walking on 2 or 4 legs and equipped with a thumb in the shape of a spike. This group foreshadows the hadrosaurs, duck-billed dinosaurs, that will enjoy immense success later on. Among carnivores, the early Cretaceous marks the emergence or diversification of notable families. Spinosaurids, including Spinosaurus, although the most gigantic form is attested in the middle to late Cretaceous, Carcharodontosaurids, like Carcharodontosaurus, and even primitive tyrannosauroids, small and agile, for example, Dailong in Asia. Some lineages of theropods develop feathery structures for communication, thermal protection, or attempts at gliding flight. Microraptor, for instance, is a 4-winged dromaeosaurid, 2 pairs of feathered limbs, living in China during the early Cretaceous. On the plant front, a crucial revolution starts: the appearance and diversification of angiosperms, i.e., flowering plants. While the first reliable fossil traces date from the early Cretaceous, around 130–125 million years ago, it is likely that their ancestors developed in tropical or subtropical environments. Flowers, protecting ovules within carpels, foster more sophisticated pollination strategies. This coincides with the diversification of pollinating insects, primitive bees, beetles, rudimentary butterflies, creating new ecological networks. Conifers, cycads, and ferns remain important, but angiosperms start to gain ground. In the seas, ichthyosaurs regress and eventually disappear during the Middle Cretaceous, replaced in the roles of large marine predators by plesiosaurs, and especially by newcomers, mosasaurs. The first mosasaurs appear rather towards the end of the early Cretaceous and will become formidable predators in the late Cretaceous. Ammonites maintain a key role in ecosystems and present an incredible variety of forms, spiral shells with complex ornamentations. By the middle of the Cretaceous, the global climate is warmer than it is today. Polar ice caps are practically non-existent, and sea levels rise, flooding parts of the continents. Inland seas, such as the Western Interior Seaway in North America, divide the lands and create a multitude of distinct biotopes. Dinosaurs diversify spectacularly. The famous titanosaurs, successors of the great Jurassic sauropods, flourish especially in the southern hemisphere. Argentinosaurus or Patagotitan are among the most gigantic herbivores that Earth has ever borne, up to 35 meters or 115 feet long, and masses exceeding 50 tons or 110,231 lbs. In the skies, pterosaurs sometimes reach gigantic dimensions. Azhdarhids, like Quetzalcoatlus, can have a wingspan of over 10 meters or 33 feet. Primitive birds, descendants of feathered theropod dinosaurs, improve in flight. Genera such as Ichthyornis or Hesperornis traverse the skies and shallow waters. The seas see their super predators renewed. Mosasaurs, close relatives of present-day monitor lizards, become impressive conquerors of the oceans, up to over 15 meters or 49 feet long. Meanwhile, angiosperms continue their floral conquest. The first flowering trees appear, such as archaic Magnoliaceae, or plants from the water lily group in aquatic environments. This blooming impacts the insect fauna and causes a rapid diversification of beetles, bees, butterflies, and flies. Approximately 66 million years ago, a cataclysmic event ended the Cretaceous period, the Cretaceous-Paleogene mass extinction. It is estimated that this led to the disappearance of 75% of species, including almost all non-avian dinosaurs, large marine reptiles, mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, and many pterosaurs. The prolific ammonites also largely became extinct. The most commonly accepted hypothesis attributes this extinction to the impact of an asteroid about 10 kilometers or 6 miles in diameter in the Yucatan Peninsula. This impact released colossal energy, throwing enormous quantities of dust and sulfur aerosols into the atmosphere, generating an impact winter that darkened the planet. In parallel, intense volcanic activity in the Deccan Traps in India also released large amounts of greenhouse gases and ash, exacerbating climatic disturbances. This conjunction of factors triggered a rapid collapse in photosynthetic productivity, harming both terrestrial and marine ecosystems. Large animals, reliant on an already fragile trophic network, could not cope with these upheavals. At the end of the Cretaceous, the Mesozoic era came to an abrupt end. The world of yesterday, dominated by non-avian dinosaurs, giant pterosaurs, and marine reptiles, gave way to a new world. Mammals, freed from the competition imposed by the great reptiles, began a phenomenal evolutionary radiation at the beginning of the Paleogene. Birds diversified in the sky, direct heirs of feathered theropods. As for flowering plants, they definitively took over in the structuring of forests, encouraged by coevolution with insects. The continents continued to drift, slowly shaping the geography as we know it. The Atlantic widened, India slowly collided with Asia, triggering the uplift of the Himalayas. South America and Africa were no longer connected, and Antarctica detached, heading towards the poles. This global dynamic, initiated as early as the Triassic, influenced long-term ocean currents and climate, conditioning the emergence of new faunas and floras. Today, when we explore dense tropical forests, observe a crocodile basking in the sun, or hear a bird singing on a branch, we are truly admiring the legacy of these bygone eras. The flowers we see blooming in spring are the result of a conquest of land and light that began in the Cretaceous. The mammals that run in our plains and the birds that populate our skies are the descendants of animals that, hundreds of millions of years ago, adapted in the shadow of giant dinosaurs. Thus, the world of yesterday has bequeathed to the world of today an invaluable diversity.
But before becoming the beautiful planet we know today, populated by countless species including humans, almost everything had to be reinvented. This renewal was marked by a first period, the Paleogene. It is the first of 3 periods making up the Cenozoic era, the other 2 being the Neogene and the Quaternary, the very era in which we now find ourselves. The Paleogene period, which stretches from 66 to 23.03 million years ago, is subdivided into 3 distinct eras. The oldest, the Paleocene, lasts 10 million years. It corresponds to the period when the Earth began to recover from the mass extinction that closed the Cretaceous. The Eocene, the second and longest of the 3 epochs, was marked by a warm climate for 22 million years, favoring rapid diversification of life, and the expansion of mammals and flowering plants. The third Paleogene epoch, the Oligocene, extends from 33.9 to 23.03 million years ago, and corresponds to a period of slow global cooling. Once again, animals and plants had to demonstrate a major capacity for adaptation. But let's return to the moment when the Earth was the scene of the 5th biological crisis. The one that claimed the lives of the great reptiles, including the dinosaurs and pterosaurs, and definitively wiped out various families of mollusks, notably the ammonites. Following the destructive impact of the meteorite in the Gulf of Mexico and the lava flows flooding the Deccan Plateau in India, a volcanic winter set in. The fire and brimstone planet is rapidly turning into a dark, cold land, its atmosphere saturated with ash and sulfur. According to a 2017 study, however, the low temperatures did not persist for more than 10 years. Unfortunately, this period, although extremely short on the geological timescale, is more than enough to harm all living beings, especially non-marine species. Animals and plants, if they did not perish in the gigantic fires, are now freezing to death. Large herbivores with nothing left to eat are disappearing one by one. Famine spreads far beyond the impact site or volcanic region. Carnivores, even if they managed to survive for a while, succumbed in their turn. The cruel lack of light hinders photosynthesis. In the oceans, phytoplankton are also dying. The food chain is wiped out. Only small rodents, insects, reptiles, and birds can survive. In the end, apart from insects and the vast majority of mollusks, which managed to continue their evolution, it was the animal species belonging to the 4 orders of reptiles that escaped this hecatomb. Turtles, snakes, lizards, and crocodiles came out on top, proving extremely resilient during this chaotic planetary reshuffle. Indeed, less than a year after the Earth was shaken by this series of cataclysms, the skies are gradually clearing. Blue skies gradually pierce the harmful clouds, and the sun finally reappears. The seeds and pollen that have been preserved can at last begin a new germination process. Carried by the winds, these seeds, most of them fern seeds, are planted all over the planet, which is greening up here and there as best it can. This meager pittance, while good for insects, is not yet enough to allow larger animal species to thrive. It would take another decade for other plant species to develop, namely palm trees. Once the chaos had dissipated, the Earth regained a certain equilibrium during the first geological period of the Cenozoic era. This period, the Paleocene, extends from 56 to 66 million years ago on the stratigraphic scale. It is divided into 3 stages: the Danian, the oldest, which lasts almost 5 million years, the Selandian, which lasts just over 2 million years, and the Thanatian, which spans just over 3 million years. Following the Cretaceous period, the Paleocene ushered in an era of biological recovery and renewal. After the brief, macabre volcanic winter, the climate gradually became milder. While the Earth's overall temperature was generally lower than in the previous era, it was still higher than today. As you can well imagine, this global warmth allowed lush biodiversity to flourish. Dense forests quickly developed, populated by diverse flora and fauna. On the other hand, the climate was characterized by increased humidity. This increased humidity translated into abundant precipitation, evenly distributed throughout the year. As a result, North America saw the emergence of even more opulent forests than in the previous period, while mangroves flourished in Australia, then positioned at southern latitudes around 65 degrees. Redwoods colonized all continents, which were gradually being covered by primary forests. At the same time, cacti were making their appearance. Tropical forests spread on both sides of the equator up to 50 degrees latitude, well beyond their current limits. A subtropical climate prevailed over areas that today are temperate, even polar. In fact, traces of fossilized flora have been found in Alaska, proving that these regions did not enjoy an icy climate, but rather a cool, temperate one. They were then covered with forests of broad-leaved deciduous trees. Flowering plants, or angiosperms, continued their conquest of land, with the precious help of numerous pollinating insects. At the same time, the continents continued the slow drift that had begun with the fragmentation of the supercontinent Pangaea. This geological transformation is characterized by three major movements. Greenland and North America began to drift apart, and India and Asia began to collide, leading to the formation of the Himalayas. Finally, Australia begins to break its link with Antarctica. As for the other continents, their separation is already significant, and they continue to move further and further apart. This same period saw the inland seas of North America and Europe partially recede. The newly emerged land, rich in sediment, offered new spaces for fauna and flora that were eager to proliferate. Mammals in particular flourished during this period to an unprecedented degree. Unlike the previous period, they no longer had to make do with the few crumbs left by the dinosaurs, which had not survived. They were thus able to take advantage of ecological niches that were finally accessible, to the extent that 22 new orders were born over the 10 million years covered by the Paleocene. Among these emerging mammals was Ptilotis, a small rodent that, like our squirrels, could climb trees. It left many traces of its existence during this period, notably in Canada. Fossils of another small mammal have also been discovered in the USA and Canada. These belong to the Purgatorius, an animal the size of a rat or squirrel. Equipped with particularly mobile ankles, this small mammal was probably omnivorous, being as agile in trees as on the ground. It probably fed on fruit and insects, but also, like all scavengers, on all kinds of animal remains, even stolen eggs. There's every reason to believe that its growth cycle and mode of reproduction were similar to those of our contemporary rodents. In other words, rapid growth with a short lifespan, and consequently, early sexual maturity. But above all, Purgatorius stands out as an emblematic species of the Paleocene, embodying one of the first known links in the evolutionary line of primates, our distant ancestors. Marsupials resembling our opossums have been found in South America and Australia, the latter having probably migrated via Antarctica before the land separation. Criacus, another agile raccoon-like climber, measuring 1 meter from snout to tail tip, has also colonized the forest. Doubtless omnivorous, its diet includes insects, fruit, eggs, and small mammals. A member of the same family, the Arctocyan was also found in Europe. This bear dog was a type of mammal that, although extinct today, has left an indelible imprint on the fossil record. About the size of a large dog, its short, powerful legs had claw-like nails at the tips. Although it moved like a bear, or even a human, on the soles of its feet, its robust legs suggested an ability to cover vast territories in search of food. Its elongated, solid skull featured a pronounced sagittal crest, the hallmark of a powerful masticatory musculature. Moreover, its dental characteristics indicate that it was probably an ancestor of our modern bears, then in transition from a carnivorous to a herbivorous diet. In fact, the fossils studied revealed robust molars for crushing, incisors adapted to plucking leaves, and tapered canines resembling tusks. The Arctocyon, primevis, the most widespread species in Europe from this period, suggests an animal with little specialization. This is probably why it proved particularly adaptable to a variety of environments and food sources. A valuable link between past and present, this bear dog continues to captivate scientists with its remarkable adaptability. Creodonts also made their appearance during the Paleocene. These carnivorous mammals are close neighbors of our felines, with whom they share a common ancestor. A precursor of the primate order, the Plesiadapis, was also present at this time, particularly in North America and Europe. Resembling a squirrel or a lemur with sharp claws, its habitat was the forest, and its favorite food was insects. Over time, various hoofed species have similarly emerged, considered the ancestors of our horses, pigs, and rhinoceroses. Of modest build, these new arrivals were no bigger than sheep, with the exception of the Ankylogon Saurognathus, whose size was similar to that of a bear. This carnivorous mammal, with its powerful jaws and well-developed canine teeth, was the largest mesonychid known at the time and reigned mainly in North America. Its sharp teeth and exceptionally strong jaw muscles would have enabled it to tear flesh with formidable efficiency, making it a terrible predator. While life returned to normal during the Paleocene, with many new species appearing on Earth, the sky was populated solely by clouds. Pteranodontidae, the flying vertebrates of the pterosaur family, like many other species, did not survive the previous extinction due to a lack of tree vegetation. The two main bird types present at the beginning of the Paleocene, the only surviving dinosaurs, were neorniths, a subclass of modern birds. Divided into two clades, the paleognaths and the neognaths, these vertebrates were rather large, but above all flightless. Among the neognaths, present in greater numbers during this period, the diatrema, which could reach 2 meters in height, hunted its prey in frenzied chases. Indeed, although these birds were unable to fly, they were very good runners, much to the chagrin of their victims, who were quickly devoured. Another imposing silhouette stood out in the lush forests and marshy plains of North America and Europe, particularly France. The Gastornis, a winged titan, standing 2 meters tall, dominated the lands of the Old World. Its short wings and sturdy legs testify to its predisposition to tread the ground rather than the skies. Its massive beak suggests a remarkable grasping power, capable of crushing its meals with ease. By the way, was the Gastornis a carnivore or a herbivore? Had it too inherited the ferocious appetite of the famous terror birds that plagued other dinosaurs? Despite the enormous size of its beak, this gigantic chicken, just as frightening as it looked, actually ate nothing but plants. As for the paleognaths, they are distinguished from the other clade by their skeletal structure, which is singularly devoid of the brevis, the sternal bone to which the powerful wing muscles are attached. Their contemporary representatives are the ratites, which include ostriches, emus, and kiwis. Their reduced wings, non-functional for flight, and heavy body structure suggest that these land birds must have been omnivorous or herbivorous. All these varieties of land animals, along with a wide range of insects, played an important role in Paleocene handful of thousands of years. As if the planet's thermostat had locked into a warming position, global temperatures soared. This phenomenon, which marks the end of the Paleocene, occurred around 56 million years ago. This transition between two geological eras, which in turn reshaped a number of ecosystems, is known as the PETM, or Paleocene-Eocene, thermal maximum. The PETM is characterized by a sudden rise in global temperature, estimated at between plus 8 degrees Celsius and plus 14 degrees Fahrenheit. This hyperthermal episode, which occurred in the blink of an eye on the scale of geological time, was accompanied by massive releases of carbon into the atmosphere. According to experts, 2,000 gigatons of methane may have been released into the atmosphere during this global warming. This greenhouse gas, considered to be 10 times more potent than carbon dioxide, will have contributed significantly to the rise in global temperature. But what process could have led to this tipping point being crossed, resulting in climate change with major biological consequences? For scientists, only two explanations seem plausible. The significant increase in atmospheric carbon levels could be the result of intense volcanic activity, or it could be attributed to the destabilization of methane hydrates on the ocean floor. Some even suggest that these two processes may have been successive, with the former generating the latter. The hydrothermal vents attributed to volcanoes would then have triggered the onset of warming. Then, through a positive feedback effect, as initial temperatures rose, they in turn destabilized immense carbon reservoirs, namely the submarine methane hydrates. The Earth's topography at the time could also have been a factor in this exceptional warming. The northern and southern parts of the American continent were not yet linked by the Isthmus of Panama, and the Mediterranean was still communicating with the Indian Ocean. As for Antarctica, it was still connected to South America, making thermal insulation impossible. This configuration explains why there were no ice caps covering the Earth at the beginning of this period. As proof of this, fossilized traces of Nothofagus, a southern beach still found today in Patagonia, have been found in Antarctica, then covered by so-called temperate forests. But not only. In 2012, researchers reported the discovery of fossils from a tropical forest in the same region. Pollens from ferns and palms were found, as well as fossils corresponding to crocodile species. It turns out that the North Pole was also home to tropical flora and fauna. In 2017, specialists revealed evidence of the existence of mangroves. However, while this warming benefits some species, notably vegetation, it affects others, particularly marine organisms, with calcareous shells. Foraminifera, the shell-bearing protozoan organisms that once populated the seabed, and which are particularly sensitive to the rising acidity of their environment, have been hit hard. It is estimated that 50% of them did not survive, as did many other marine species that also disappeared during this exceptional climatic event. Seasonal characteristics, such as more abundant rainfall, enabled tropical rainforests to cover even more territory. As new ecological niches opened up in these mutated regions, intercontinental migrations took place and modern mammal species emerged. Admittedly, the Paleocene extinction is smaller than the one that wiped out dinosaur populations. But this minor extinction, unlike the many others the Earth may have experienced, nonetheless marks a decisive turning point in the evolution of species. It led to the second Paleogene period, the Eocene, which extended from 56 to 34 million years ago. This period is made up of three subdivisions: the Upper Eocene, the Middle Eocene, and the Lower Eocene, the last two of which themselves comprise different stages. Succeeding the Paleocene, this new period was marked by the emergence of the first cetaceans and the first modern mammals. But above all, it marks the advent of the dominant era of the latter. From surviving prey alongside the dinosaurs, mammals became the main predators over time. At the beginning of the Eocene, the continent, still drifting, took on a shape even more recognizable to us, while ocean currents underwent fundamental changes. The Tethys Sea, which separated the African continent from Eurasia, shrank even further during this period, to the benefit of the Atlantic Ocean. The latter opened wider, pushing North America further away from Europe, as the continent continued its westward drift. After breaking away from Europe, a newly formed continent drifted northwards, giving rise to the Greenland we know today. This geological event, which took place 55 million years ago, led to violent volcanic eruptions between present-day Greenland and Great Britain. Huge quantities of methane and carbon dioxide were released into the atmosphere, contributing to a further rise in temperature and raising the surface temperature of Arctic zones by a further 6 degrees. As for the Pacific Ocean, which has never undergone major changes, it is already as deep as it is today. Meanwhile, India continues its collision with Asia. As a result of this spectacular rapprochement, the land underwent significant changes, giving rise to the famous Himalayas. Australia and Antarctica are now two distinct continents, gradually drifting apart. Australia heads north, while Antarctica, then lush and green, moves towards the South Pole. During the first half of the Eocene, the climate that dominated the planet was largely tropical, to the extent that the two poles, still devoid of the slightest ice, were covered with rich vegetation. Dense jungles and forests, dominated by palms and broad-leaved trees, cover most of the land up to high latitudes. Taking advantage of this warm, humid climate, the flora and fauna have undergone unprecedented diversification over several million years. Mammals in particular evolved rapidly, taking advantage of the niches left vacant by the last dinosaurs, now totally extinct. Birds also continued to develop, as did reptiles, which became much less dominant. While flying birds were less common during the Paleocene than large flightless birds like Gastornis, new species began to appear and diversify. The high skies of the Eocene, hitherto devoid of animal traces, began to welcome new bird species. One notable example is the Pelagornis sandersi, reputed to have been one of the largest flying birds in history. Its wingspan sometimes reaches over 7 meters, or 23 feet. Compared with our largest modern birds, such as the Andean condor, it appears appears to be at least twice as big. Pelagornis sandersi is a seabird that probably glided long distances over the oceans. Using air currents to maintain flight with minimum effort, it is a fascinating example of how birds adapted to life in the skies during the Eocene. In South America, Psilopterus, small predatory birds descended from two-legged dinosaurs, displayed similar behaviors to their ancestors. Nicknamed terror birds, if they were able to fly, they must have been very limited. Indeed, their small wings indicate that they spent most of their time on the ground. During this period, many new groups appeared, including around 50 million years ago, Pakicetus, the ancestor of the whale. This mammal represents a key stage in the evolutionary transition of cetaceans from land to the deep sea. Indeed, this precursor of the whale, which lived near the rivers and deltas of Pakistan, is not an aquatic animal, but a terrestrial one. While the study of its skull, and in particular the structure of its inner ear, leaves no doubt that it belonged to the cetacean group, Pakicetus had a unique anatomy. It had a streamlined body, robust limbs perfectly adapted to running, and a head adorned with a long pointed snout, containing teeth designed to tear flesh. These characteristics show that it was an agile, opportunistic predator with a carnivorous diet. Its particularly varied menu included small land animals and fish. Thanks to the study of fossils, scientists are now able to confirm that Pakicetus is an extinct genus of cetacean. Its ankles, identical to those of artiodactyls, underline its membership of the great ungulate family, which itself heralded the emergence of the first aquatic ancestors of whales. The Pakicetus alone embodies the extraordinary evolutionary journey of cetaceans. From its first steps on land to its conquest of the oceans, it opens a fascinating chapter in natural history. Over the millennia, the swampy area where the Pakicetus resides, the region of the globe where the Tethys Sea once stood, has seen many species acclimatized to this environment. Pakicetus itself, spending most of its time foraging in the water, as our crocodiles do, probably gave rise to Ambulocetus, in other words, the walking whale. Measuring up to 3 meters or 10 feet in length and weighing up to 300 kilograms or 660 pounds, it used to blend into the landscape, both terrestrial and aquatic, and wait for prey to come close enough. Lacking external ears, it was nevertheless perfectly able to pick up the vibrations emitted by its prey, whether in the water or on land. Although its hind legs made it more agile in the water, where it undulated like a whale, this carnivore, half aquatic, half terrestrial, also moved quite well on land. In this prosperous environment, other carnivorous aquatic mammals emerged alongside it, such as Himalayacetus and Indocetus, also early whales. On land, many newcomers also appeared during the Eocene. No bigger than a dog, Phenacotus was an ungulate of the placental mammal class. Modest in size and light in build, it was characterized by a digitigrade gait, similar to that of our tapirs. Its relatively predominant middle toe bore most of its body weight, while the other 4 toes on either side probably ended in hooves. In other words, Phenacotus heralded the tridactyl type common to perissodactyls, whose future families will almost certainly include equids such as horses, donkeys, and zebras. In fact, the first member of the evolutionary horse family appeared at the same time, Hyracotherium, also known as Eohippus. Often nicknamed the dawn horse, it is considered one of the oldest known ancestors of modern horses. It is therefore one of the herbivorous mammals that significantly marked the Paleogene period. This small ungulate, which lives in the forests of North America and Western Europe, is no bigger than the average dog, at around 30 centimeters or 12 inches high at the withers. This creature, though different in appearance from today's horses, played a key role in the evolution of these mammals and remains an important subject of study for paleontologists. Among the ungulate mammals of this family, Megacerops, a distant cousin of the rhinoceros, also made its debut towards the end of the Eocene, also in North America. It belongs to the first giant mammals of this period. With a build equivalent to that of an African forest elephant, it measured around 2.5 meters at the withers and could reach up to 5 meters or 16 feet in total length. As for its weight, it has been estimated at almost 5 tons, far more than the rhinoceros we come across today. A distinctive feature on its snout is a pair of blunt horns, more prominent in males. This distinction suggests brawling social behavior during rutting periods, with head-to-head combat. Nevertheless, this colossus, with its huge muscles to support its heavy skull, posed little danger to its contemporaries, especially as it was a herbivore. Indeed, Megacerops possess fleshy lips and a long tongue, attributes well suited to selecting its food, which consisted mainly of tender shoots and leaves. Many vegetarian animals thrived on this inexhaustible resource. In addition, leafy trees, increasingly abundant on the planet, offered abundant food to those who could get close to them, or even better, climb them. The Eocene thus marks a turning point in the history of our primate ancestors. It was during this period that these creatures, reminiscent of today's lemurs, established themselves in the canopy. The canopy is made up of a dense network of prodigiously leafy and fruit-bearing branches. The forests of the Eocene, with their abundant deciduous trees, became the ideal setting for major evolutions. The treetops became havens of peace, where small mammals and birds could feed without fear of predators lurking on the ground. In this suspended paradise, the ancestral primates undergo a metamorphosis. Their eyesight adapts to distinguish the nuances of ripe fruit. Their limbs evolve. The legs are transformed into prehensile feet, greatly improving their ability to move from tree to tree. An emblematic feature of these dexterous legs was born: the opposable thumb. This invaluable tool for grasping and manipulating paves the way for the dexterity that has characterized primates down the ages. Whether they lived in North America, Africa, or Asia, Eocene primates already possess several attributes characteristic of this group. Their feet, now capable of grasping, end not in claws but in nails. As for their eyes, they are protected by a bony structure and face forward, enabling binocular vision for the first time. These two features are reminiscent of a certain hominid you know very well, aren't they? During this particularly propitious period, the fauna continued its slow diversification. New orders of mammals appeared. These include the lagomorphs, the ancestors of our rabbits and hares, and the chiropterans. Indeed, the oldest recorded bat dates from this same period. All this could almost make us forget the cruelty that must have reigned in those days. Let's not forget that on the ground, as everywhere else, the law of the strongest dominates. In this now well-established food chain, one mammal became one of the most impressive predators of the Eocene. Belonging to the group of ungulate quadrupeds of Paleocene origin, it is Andrewsarchus, probably the largest terrestrial carnivorous mammal of this period. The only fossil of this colossus discovered to date was in Mongolia. It consists of a skull measuring around 90 centimeters or 35 inches long. This dimension suggests that the size of this animal must have been out of the ordinary in its class. Indeed, Andrewsarchus must have reached 4 meters or 13 feet in length and weighed close to 800 kilograms or 1,800 pounds. Compared with the new orders of mammals that have recently appeared, most of which weigh no more than 10 kilograms or 22 pounds, this was undoubtedly one of the most imposing. Roaming the plains, this fearsome animal fed in part on the large herbivores that shared its habitat, although some fossils suggest it may even have been omnivorous. But while the oceans and lands saw all kinds of animal and plant species proliferate insidiously, the planet was preparing for a new metamorphosis. Indeed, the extreme global warming that marked the beginning of the Eocene lasted no more than 100,000 to 150,000 years. This was followed by what geologists call the Eocene climatic optimum, which lasted nearly 5 million years. This climatic episode, the warmest of the Cenozoic era, lasted from around -54 to -49 million years. During these 5 million years, surface temperatures differed only slightly from those on the ocean floor, and as mentioned earlier, seasons showed little contrast. As this period drew to a close, a first upheaval took place in one part of the globe. While the Earth's poles were free of ice and aquatic ferns reigned supreme, a biological event was to influence the climate of the entire globe. It's the Azola event. Due to the Earth's tectonic configuration some 49 million years ago, the Arctic Ocean is virtually isolated from other oceans. The warm, windy climate in this part of the world favors evaporation. As a result, the density of the ocean increases, generating heavy precipitation on land. The rivers flowing into the ocean brought with them large quantities of fresh water and consequently nutrients. In the form of a thin, low-density nepheloid layer, these components covered the ocean, enabling the development of an aquatic fern, Azola. All the conditions were ripe for this plant to proliferate. In the space of 800,000 years, carpets of Azola covered almost 4 million square kilometers of the Arctic Ocean. On long, sunny days, the photosynthesis process begins to reduce the density of carbon in the atmosphere. More importantly, as these floating ferns die, they settle to the bottom of the ocean in an anoxic, oxygen-free environment, where they are protected from decomposition. Together, these two mechanisms trap almost 80% of the CO2 that was previously highly concentrated in the atmosphere. This considerably reduced the greenhouse effect, which was particularly significant at the beginning of the Eocene. In less than a few million years, ice appeared in the Arctic, whereas average temperatures dropped from 13 degrees Celsius, or 55 degrees Fahrenheit, to -9 degrees Celsius, or 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Nevertheless, the global climate remained warm overall, even if it tended to cool slowly throughout this period, until another drastic event occurred. For 34 million years ago, the Eocene came to an end. Once again, life experienced a major crisis. This unfortunate parenthesis, known as the Great Divide, corresponds to a new mass extinction. A major reshuffling of the fauna affected mainly terrestrial species. The causes of this umpteenth biological crisis are diverse, and still the subject of debate among scientists. A sudden global cooling of the planet, at least on a geological scale, is undeniable. Indeed, the end of the Eocene is marked by a rapid drop in temperature of the order of 4 degrees Celsius, or 7 degrees Fahrenheit, in just 500,000 years, concomitant with a significant drop in sea level. At the same time, the Drake Strait separating South America from Antarctica formed, opening the way for a cold current to circumnavigate the globe. Antarctica, totally isolated, gradually became covered by a perennial ice cap. The whole planet cools and a new ice age begins. While snow began to fall in the polar latitudes, over time it moved closer to the equator. First at high altitude, on the summits of newly formed mountains, then on the plains. Seasons are now very distinct, especially in Eurasia and North America, where harsh winters follow summer droughts. Warm tropical forests are now confined to the equatorial belt, while temperate zones are seeing the development of a new type of vegetation. Conifers and deciduous trees now populate these areas, but these forests, identical to those found in northern Europe and Canada, are not as welcoming as their predecessors. During the cold season, fruit, berries, and tender foliage are scarce, forcing species inclined to migrate to leave their homes. As for the rest, it appears that 50% of Europe's endemic mammal fauna became extinct during this event, replaced by immigrant species from Asia. On a more global scale, this reshuffling of the fauna affected landmasses located in mid-latitudes, where the climate changed from tropical to temperate. On a global scale, scientists have dubbed this new biological crisis the terminal Eocene event. But what could have caused this cooling? Can the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, known as the most important ocean current on the planet, explain this global cooling on its own? While it is undeniable that the Antarctic Circumpolar Current has played a major role, other causes may explain this global drop in temperature. The main current theory is the decrease in atmospheric carbon dioxide. The latter would have declined slowly from the middle to the end of the Eocene, due in part to the strong alteration of silicates in warm climates. Alteration of silicates, which account for 97% of the rocks in the Earth's crust, is a set of reactions known to consume large quantities of CO2. In addition, widespread volcanic activity, possibly caused by the Ethiopian high plateaus or Ethiopian traps, may have contributed to the onset of a new volcanic winter. Finally, the fall of several meteorites has also been suggested. Various craters dating from the same period, identified in Chesapeake Bay in the USA, or the Pangaea crater in central Siberia, support this theory. But if the Great Divide is marked by this major climatic event, another phenomenon is responsible for the extinction of numerous species. The migration of animal species must also be taken into account. This intercontinental transhumance, due to the change in weather, was made possible by another phenomenon. These include changes in interactions between certain continents. The drying up of the Turgai Inland Sea, which had previously separated Europe from Asia, opened up new horizons for Asian fauna. This led to a major migration of Asian fauna to present-day Europe. The local European fauna, somewhat different with less corpulent specimens, underwent a considerable impact, which, coupled with this period of glaciation, resulted in a significant renewal of species, leading to a mass extinction. This migratory movement also took place in North America and Africa, these continents not spared by the new meteorological conditions. While some species fail to survive and disappear, others newly arrived are confronted with the need to adapt to a different living environment. But fortunately, following the principles of natural selection, some succeed in adapting, even diversifying and evolving. Here we are at the third and final Paleogene epoch. This period is known as the Oligocene. Subdivided into two geological stages, the Rhipelian and the Cetetian, it extends from -33 to -23 million years BC. The Oligocene marks the transition between the tropical Eocene and the more modern Miocene ecosystems. During this third Paleogene epoch, the landscape changes once again. Once again, flora and fauna had to adapt to survive. Tropical and intertropical forests are replaced by temperate deciduous forests, and grasses begin to spread from the banks of rivers and lakes. Monocotyledons, i.e. grasses, became highly diversified for the first time, even colonizing certain territories, which were thus covered with immense grasslands. Lands at high and mid-latitudes, once home to tropical rainforests, are now occupied by rich savannas, sometimes consisting of vast expanses of grass, sometimes of inviting forests. In these environments where colorful flowering plants are multiplying as never before, insect diversification continues. Already present in dinosaur times, three groups continue to evolve. These include Coleoptera, to which beetles and ladybugs belong, Diptera, such as flies and mosquitoes, and Hymenoptera, from which bees and wasps have evolved. But with such a proliferation of flowering plants, another group, hitherto almost invisible, is multiplying for the first time. This is the group of Lepidoptera, or butterflies. Marine and terrestrial fauna are becoming more modern, and new forms adapted to open savanna-type habitats are emerging. Nonetheless, these changes in the populations took place smoothly, prompting scientists to describe the period as a quiet one. Indeed, although the mammalian fauna underwent significant reorganization during the Oligocene, particularly in Europe, communities remained relatively stable. Grazing mammals underwent significant evolutionary radiation. As a result of this rapid evolution, many artiodactyls and perissodactyls replaced the dominant Eocene species. The Entelodon magnus is one of the fascinating creatures of this period in Europe, Asia, and North America. Measuring nearly 3.5 meters or 11 feet in length, this massive member of the artiodactyl family weighs up to a ton. Probably omnivorous, it is able to crush bones and consume large chunks of flesh. to the detriment of the chalicotheres, those half-horse, half-gorilla animals, and camelids it mingles with. With its impressive canines and robust stature, Entelodon magnus was able to rival other large carnivores of its time, such as Hyenodon. This feline-like creodont, whose name literally means hyena tooth, ranges in size from 30 centimeters, or 12 inches, to 1.4 meters, or 4 feet. Its undisputed strong point is its speed, which can reach 55 kilometers per hour, or 34 miles per hour. This is a considerable advantage over its main rival, which is much slower. But the animal that most symbolizes Asian migration is certainly the rhinoceros. 3 families of rhinoceros, or horns on their noses, appeared at the same time. Some were much more graceful than today's rhinos, with slimmer bodies and thinner legs, and were good runners despite their size. They belong to the Hyraconodontidae family. We also find the Rhinocerotidae, which are smaller and prefer to live in herds. As for the Amnionodontidae, they resemble hippopotamuses and feed on aquatic plants. But it's in Asia that we must turn our gaze to meet the largest mammal of all time. This rhinoceros giraffe, of the learned name Indricotherium, a close relative of the rhinoceros, shows off its incredible stature, measuring over 5 meters or 16 feet in height, 8 meters or 26 feet in length, and weighing up to 15 tons. However, despite its size, this mastodon is not a predator. Its massive heavy head means it can't even graze on pasture. The fauna that developed abundantly during the Oligocene was distributed across the globe. However, South America, still isolated from the other continents, is home to a distinct fauna. One of the emblematic animal species of this period is the Pyrotherium. It resembles an elephant with massive limbs, tusks, and a trunk. Another notable species from this continent is the boar hyena. This carnivorous predator, like today's Australian hyenas, is particularly adept at running and is extremely fearsome to its fellow creatures. Among the predators present during the Oligocene, Vasuki indicus is a colossal snake that could well dethrone the famous Titanoboa. The only specimen recently discovered in the Naredi Formation, located in the Indian state of Gujarat, is probably the largest snake ever to have existed on the planet. Imagine a reptile as long as a school bus. According to paleontologists who have had the privilege of studying the 27 giant fossilized vertebrae of this creature, its length is estimated at 15 meters or 50 feet. These vertebrae suggest that this wide-bodied, cylindrical crawling monster, resembling a giant python, could have weighed close to a ton. Near the swamps where this non-venomous snake mastered the art of concealment, woe betide any prey approaching this ambush. Once seized under the effect of a Herculean constriction, their slow agony was prolonged until certain death before they were ingested. Several factors probably contributed to the existence of such a large, cold-blooded animal. For scientists, higher temperatures than we know today, together with the absence of indigenous predators, represent particularly favorable conditions. What's more, given the numerous fossils discovered nearby, including crocodiles, turtles, and fish, there seemed to be no shortage of relatively abundant food. In short, the Vasuki indicus evolved in an environment that was particularly conducive to its development. If the terrestrial landscape underwent major changes during the Oligocene, so did the marine environment. The Tethys Ocean, once a sanctuary for marine life, gradually shrank. This monumental change has led to the collapse of its previously richly biodiverse ecosystem. The seas around Southeast Asia and Australia have become the new epicenters of marine diversity. In the face of this upheaval, a large proportion of marine life was unable to survive. Nearly 97% of marine snails, 89% of clams, and half of Gulf echinoderms have disappeared. Despite the appearance of new species, overall diversity suffered a notable decline. Mollusks adapted to cold waters undertook a colossal journey, moving along the Pacific coast from the distant seabeds of Alaska and Siberia. Oligocene oceans began to reflect the fauna we know today, with the appearance of calcareous ceratuluids, a family of worms, and the abundance of bivalves such as mussels and oysters. Small, colorful parrotfish appeared and diversified, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. Similarly, during the Oligocene, baleen and toothed whales emerged, while their ancestors, the archosaurs cetaceans, failed to adapt to increasingly cold and opaque waters. Lacking echolocation, a sonar system enabling them to locate their prey, or any obstacles at all, these old-world cetaceans eventually declined. All the more so, as competition with modern cetaceans and razorback sharks has never been tougher for them. Other newcomers among marine mammals include Behematops, a hippopotamus-like herbivore whose genus is now extinct, or pinnipeds, semi-aquatic mammals with flipper-like legs, such as the otter-like Pugilla darwini. This animal, measuring around 1 meter or 3 feet in length, is considered a transitional form between the terrestrial ancestors of pinnipeds and present-day species such as seals or sea lions, which are totally aquatic. But as life once again emancipates itself, having successfully thwarted upheavals of every kind, what's next? For 23 million years ago, the Paleogene gave way to an unprecedented period. What mysteries lie behind the end of this first Cenozoic period? Whatever the case, each denouement is only the prelude to a new beginning, as the geological timescale testifies. As we close the chapter on the Paleogene, the post-dinosaur era, we can only marvel at the resilience and adaptability of life on Earth. This period, marked by drastic climatic changes and geological upheavals, was the scene of unprecedented evolution. From the depths of the oceans to the treetops, every species has played its part in this great symphony of biodiversity. We have seen entire ecosystems transformed, lineages extinguished, and new life forms emerging, ready to conquer unexplored realms. Above all, mammals have undergone unprecedented diversification and expansion. Small mammals evolved rapidly to occupy many specific habitats, while larger ones began to dominate terrestrial ecosystems. Marking the advent of an era dominated by mammals, the Paleogene teaches us that despite the challenges, life always finds a way to maintain itself and even transform itself.